I'm Ken Haferteep. I'm chair of the Department of Museum Studies at Baylor University, a small Christian college in Waco, Texas. And I'm delighted to be here on this day. I'm really hyper right now because I'm in such an elated state because of the wonderful show that's been put together by Ron Tyler and Michael Duty. And I hope to spend a lot of times in the gallery today because you guys have just done a wonderful job. It's really thrilling to see so much Texas art so beautifully and thoughtfully arranged. It's just a real treat. So I'm going to be camping out in that space a lot. And grateful for all friends at the Witte involved in this process. And it was very nice to hear Maurice McDermott give a shout out to Dr. William H. Getzman, who was a very important person both for me and for our speaker today, Sam Ratcliffe, and for the speaker across the hall, Francine Carraro, because we were all in graduate school together with Dr. Getzman at UT. But our mission today is to hear from Sam Ratcliffe. Sam retired recently from Southern Methodist University after 30 years as head of special collections in SMU's Jake and Nancy Heyman Arts Library, which holds the papers of significant Texas artists Jerry Bywaters, Otis Dozier, Octavio Medellin, and of actress Greer Garson, which sort of seems out there, or which one does not belong in that group, as well as other collections documenting the cultural history of the Southwest. Sam came to SMU in 1986 after a year as a Fulbright junior lecturer at Germany's University of Würzburg. Sam holds the BA in History and Political Science from SMU, the MA in American History from the University of Oklahoma, I think I've heard of that one, and the PhD in American Civilization from the University of Texas at Austin. While at UT, he studied with William H. Getzman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of the American West. Sam and I sat side by side in seminars with Dr. Getzman, and at the time that he was working on the exhibition Texas Images and Visions at the Archer M. Huntington Art Gallery at UT in 1983. And that was the synthesis, that's really the last attempt at a synthesis of Texas art before this day, and so this is why this day is so important in the history of the study of Texas art. It's just exciting to see this exhibit soar into new territory. Sam taught courses on the history and literature of Texas and the American West in SMU's Department of History and also in the Master of Liberal Arts program. He currently serves on the board of the Dallas Historical Society and also served for 6 years on the Collections Review Committee of the State Preservation Board. Ratcliffe's book, Painting Texas History to 1900, was published in 1992 by the University of Texas Press, and that analyzes paintings of events in Texas history as historical documents. Now, if you don't have a copy of Painting Texas History, shame on you. Happily, you can relieve that shame by dropping by Cheever Books down the street. I noticed there are a couple of copies that are available. I can inform you, Sam, your book still maintains a good price, so quite impressive. Though Cheever is having a 30% off sale this weekend. So, folks, this is your opportunity to complete your Texas art shelf if you don't have that book already. It's a very important study. And that study and other of his publications have received awards from such organizations as the Texas Historical Commission and the Western History Association. He also contributed an essay to and edited Jerry Bywaters' Interpreter of the Southwest from Texas A&M University Press of 2007. And that was published in conjunction with an exhibition at SMU's Meadows Museum for which he served as curator. And that was another wonderful exhibition focusing in on a very important 20th century Texas artist. And great to see Jerry Bywaters represented in this exhibition as well. So you're in for a treat, Tram. Sam has been a very important figure in the study of Texas history paintings and related paintings. So I give you Sam Ratcliffe.
Thanks, Ken. Before I start my talk, I just want to say this is sort of a mind-boggling experience for me to see all these works together, since my research interest was in 19th century Texas art and earlier, but my work life was in 20th century, so they're all here. But I do want to say, after what Marie said, that Cecilia Steinfeld, I couldn't have done it without her. I mean, driving here this morning at Broadway, and I thought of all the times I came to this museum to do research back in the 80s. And that she was just wonderful. And Martha Utterback, too. I'm so glad she can be with us today. And Martha was a great help to me at the DRT library at the Alamo. And so I spoke here at the Witte back when Cecilia's book, the Stephen Seymour Thomas book, was published. And after that, I said to people, I'm always worried about speaking in San Antonio because, for one thing, a lot of them know the history a whole lot better than I do. And another thing is, I look at name tags and I'm going, I'm talking about ancestors of these people in the audience, and I'm going to say something to make somebody mad. So if I say something that you don't like about an ancestor, just whack me over the head afterwards or something. Also, I'm from North Texas, and I didn't take French, and I'm an old dog, and I can't learn new tricks, so it's going to be Theodore Gentiles for the next 45 minutes, which beats the heck out of Gentiles, which I probably thought it used to be. So anyway, I told Ken that, now can I tell everybody, I got 40 slides, so in case you're counting, and they're going to keep, I'm not going to go over, so. In case you're keeping track, there's 40 slides. I start with the burning of a mission and end with the Galveston flood, so I guess I should have titled this Fire and Rain. And y'all could have piped James Taylor in here. But I do have a, read through the academic paper here printed out, and I'm going to kind of sort of stick to that, but I'm going to take Mary Margaret's advice and try to have fun. So let me say what this presentation will not be. It is not going to be a narrative of all of Texas history using paintings. I kind of did that in my book. But it won't even look at all the paintings that treated historical subjects, such as works by Theodore Gentiles of San Antonio and Friedrich Petrie about the German Hill Country settlements. They are in the exhibition. They're discussed in the catalog. Really, I'm focusing more narrowly on paintings that fall within the boundaries of traditional historical painting, especially in American and European art. These usually depicted heroic events of military exploits, statecraft that proved to be critical moments in the development of a nation, things like Emmanuel Leutze's Washington crossing the Delaware. And a lot of times, these paintings became as much a part of the spirit of determination they were supposed to, memorialize. So really, history painting, historical painting is in some ways a nationalistic art. Related in some way to a people's establishment and preservation of a nation state, oftentimes in the face of tremendous odds, and that certainly is true of Texas. This art intends to trigger emotions by appealing to the viewer's knowledge of the event depicted by the artist, and by implication the significance of that event in a larger historical tapestry. So approximately, just a word on organization, about the first third of this presentation is going to be discussing works according to when they were executed. The remainder of it will sort of that format, but modified according to the time of the events that are depicted. So let's get. Okay, I'm clicking forward. Let me try another one. So let me tell y'all, okay, I'm going to embarrass Ron Tyler. The first painting I'm going to talk about, there it is. Hey, they just, okay. So I did my dissertation, finished in 1985, and I was revising for publication, and Ron said, okay, thanks. He said, there's a painting of you didn't talk about the Zanzibar Massacre painting. I think my reply was something intelligent on the order of, what? And Ron said, no, there's a massacre and all this sort of thing. There's a big painting of it that was done in Mexico. So I followed Ron's advice. That delayed publication of my book by 2 years, but it also That's the bad news. The good news was it resulted in a cover article for Southwest Historical Quarterly that won an award from the Western History Association. So it was a pretty good trade-off. Okay, so this painting, I'm not going to read the entire title, The Destruction of Mission San Saba in the province of Texas. So what this depicts is in March 1758 that the Apaches had enticed the Spaniards to come out and build a mission as a buffer, really, against the Comanches. The Comanches were putting pressure on the Apaches. So the Comanches didn't like this, so they got several of their allied tribes, about 2,000 of them in March 1758, swooped down on the mission, burned the buildings to the ground, killed 6 of the inhabitants, including 3 priests, and left the rest for dead. They also killed 2 soldiers who'd ridden out from the nearby mission to protect the Presidio to protect the mission. And when word of this gets back to New Spain and Mexico City, it was just horrible, because one of the mission's priests, Father Alonso de Toreros, was a member of one of the city's most prominent families. And he is this fellow right here. Okay. So his cousin, Pedro Romero de Toreros, was a silver mining magnate. And he commissioned this huge painting. The painting's 83 by 115 inches, and I know it's been in San Antonio, I think, fairly recently. Did anybody here see the painting when it was here at the San Antonio Museum of Art? Okay. All right. So we don't know for sure who did this painting. We know it was done in the studio of Miguel Cabrera, who was probably the leading artist in mid-18th century Mexico. There's a lot of evidence that one of his artists, Jose de Apez, did it, but we don't know for sure. Okay, so what's going on here is this guy's trying to make a movie. He didn't have the technology. There are, you can't see it, doesn't show up in, whoa. I'm trying to reverse. There we go. Okay. So in the painting itself, there's like 18 little red letters, and they talk about what's going on, and that the soldiers are riding out from the Presidio coming over like this, and the Indians are negotiating as a ruse to get in there. But they also, the scroll narrates these events, and the shields are biographies of each one of these priests. And the scroll also praises, quote, the illustrious knight Don Pedro de Toreros of the Order of Calatrava, the patron of the painting. There are about 300 separate figures in this painting, and there's 18 events depicted in it. So I'm sorry we couldn't have it over the exhibition, but I know it's been in San Antonio recently. Now, this is the only work concerning Texas that we could say it was in the tradition of historical painting until the years of the Texas Republic. You know what? Do we want to bring the lights down in here? Would that help people to see the slides better? Or does it matter? Okay, yeah. Okay, that's better. Okay. Now I can't see my paper. Okay. Well, I said it was going to be fun, maybe more fun than we thought. Okay. So, in the years of the Republic, John McStanley, who was an American military officer, depicted this meeting of American and Texas representatives and members of the Anadarko, Caddo, and other tribes. It was with representatives of the Republic of Texas and the United States. Pierce Butler, the governor of Arkansas, had invited Stanley to accompany the American delegation to the confluence of the Brazos and Bosque rivers in the vicinity of that town where Ken works now, Waco. They come from Fort Gibson near the present site of Tahlequah, Oklahoma, now the capital of the Cherokee Nation. Stanley had become interested in Indians while a young man in Canandaigua, New York. There were paintings of an unknown artist on the walls of the tavern that his family owned. In 1839, he made his first excursion to the West. He was 25 then, painting genre scenes and Indian portraits near Fort Snelling, Minnesota. And for 3 years, he worked as a portrait painter and daguerreotypist and traveled throughout the northeastern U.S. before landing in Indian Territory in 1842. So here, Stanley portrays himself. So right here, this is Stanley sketching. And up here, there's an Indian with a turban on in the tree. He's sketching this guy's portrait. And we know that the Indians in eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, did wear these turbans. In fact, there's an illustration on the book Sam Houston with the Texas Cherokees from several years ago, with portraying Houston with a turban during the time he lived with the Cherokees in what was in Indian Territory. Now, we don't know, for example, there's some puzzling, there's 3 white flags here, and we don't know what they're doing there. There's no record why there are 3 flags. We don't know if they were there or not. We think they may be to represent Texas, the United States, and the Indian delegations. Now, interestingly enough, Stanley was supposed to depict what happened. Instead, he depicted what he thought would happen. He did this painting before the treaty session ever started. They got there early, so I thought, okay, I'll just do the painting. Now, once it did start, he did a number of portraits of Indians, and a lot of I'm not talking about those today, but several of those are in the exhibition, and they're really, really the one Kura Kiss is just really wonderful. Okay, so obtaining peace with Texas's native inhabitants, of course, that was a prerequisite for settlement by Americans and Europeans, and okay, this guy. Everybody in San Antonio knows who he is. Okay, he portrays him. Gentils was trained as a mathematician as well as an artist in Paris, and he was a surveyor for Henri Castro of the Castroville colony. Gentils portrayed himself sighting down the surveying stick stock right here. This is the chief surveyor for the colony, John James, right there. Gentils came over here with Castro in the early 1840s. And then 3 years after they did this survey, he goes back to Europe, to Antwerp, to recruit settlers. In 1848, he comes back to Texas, and then he settles in San Antonio. And that's when he starts making all those wonderful paintings that people in this audience know so well. Okay, another aspect of town life, once the towns were done, of course this town had been done long before this. That's right. Yeah. I'm clicking forward. Can you advance it? There we go. Okay. I don't need the slide. The reproductions are over there. And they're faithful reproductions. W.G.M. Samuel, San Antonio Deputy Sheriff, looking out Main Plaza for the Bexar County Courthouse. Samuel had fought under Bigfoot Wallace in the Mexican War. He also did portraits of early Texas heroes like Wallace, Sam Houston, Deaf Smith. Samuel, as far as you know, had little or no formal art training, but these are valuable architectural and sociological records. He didn't paint it just to leave an architectural record, however. They're wonderful genre scenes, it's slice of life. I don't know if other cities had this, but like in the 1960s in the Yellow Pages in Dallas, the guy did the cover art for that. If you looked really closely, you had wagon trains going through the streets of downtown Dallas and Indian fight. Some people are nodding, and I'm not making this up. They were really funky, covers. That was the big game every year when the Yellow Pages came out. A lot of Army freight wagons are in these paintings because San Antonio, of course, was and is an important military town. So I like to look at one of them in particular. Yeah, can you advance it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is the west side. So you have the Butterfield stage. We have y'all can look for yourselves. There's a horseman trying to lasso a runaway cow. There's a guy towing a barrel of beer behind him, a guy with a brewing establishment, obviously. And one of my favorite things, there's a young colt, a little horse. He's got a straw hat in his mouth. The little boy is chasing him. He's obviously just to grab the hat off the boy's head, and there's a horseman chasing him. There's a guy with a stick trying. Guy's trying to break up a dog fight. So it's just really entertaining slice of life, and Samuel and me just had this wonderfully whimsical sense of humor. But really, but the buildings depicted were important too. Okay. See if this will work. Yeah, we go. It worked. Great. Okay. About the same time as Samuel, this painting was done of a legendary Texas hero, but done in California by W.S. Jewett. Jewett was a New Yorker. He'd studied at the National Academy of Design. He had a really good career in New York State, and thanks to Ron Tyler for pointing this painting out to me. I wasn't aware of his existence until we started planning this show. And I would say we started planning this exhibition in this room 3 years ago in January. That was our first meeting. I walked in today. Oh, I've been here before. So Jewett painted a portrait of the New York governor. He was on his way, but then the gold rush hit. 1849, Jewett goes, I'm going to San Francisco. He goes to the gold fields. He never got beyond San Francisco because he had thought to get letters of introduction to all these prominent people in San Francisco from their New York friends. So he starts painting their portraits, starts making good living. He starts investing wisely in real estate, and he gets wealthy. And of course, that happens so much in the gold and silver strikes that a lot of people got wealthy, were people living off the side benefits of it, not the guys out there trying to get gold out of the water. Now, this portrayal of Hayes, after he left Texas, had gone to California. He had been elected sheriff of San Francisco County, and a letter of February 1850, Jewett mentioned that Hayes was visiting his studio, and we have Hayes here, but if you can, well, you can't see it, but in the exhibition, look at it. There is a little column of Indians down there, and Hayes is armed to the teeth, so we're pretty sure this is, and he titled Colonel Jack Hayes in Shannon Rock, a famous fight that Hayes had with Comanches. Now, in addition to the Texas Rangers, the U.S. Army was the other significant spearhead of Anglo settlement in mid-19th century Texas. There we go. Whoa. Thanks. All right. Richard Petrie, one of the German immigrant artists. This is his only attempt at oil painting in Texas. He had worked primarily in watercolor and other media after coming here, and he'd done a lot of watercolor, a lot of oil painting when he was a student at Dresden. It was so great to see this painting in the exhibition and the little sketch, the study sketch with it. And if y'all haven't seen the show, you'll see here this sort of silhouette of an Indian woman, but in the study sketch, she's a person. So why he didn't, it's just, I think he died before he drowned, before he could actually finish the painting. There's documentation. She's probably Lipan Apache. There was a delegation of Lipan Apaches who had come to Fort Martin Scott around this time, and there are other things. Petrie has a little boy here. He has his shirt's torn, but it looks like angel wings, like a little cherub. This seems humorous. There's right here, an Indian boy comes out to wrestle a dog for a bone, which looks funny at first. That wait a minute, they're reduced to starvation. And there's another Indian where he's drinking out of a flask out of a man's pocket. So it's so there's that commentary on the Indian situation, and there's also a valuable record of who's at the fort. The fellow in the uniform, the uniformed officer, is James Longstreet. This guy in the red, wrapped in a red blanket, Jim Shaw, was a scout, a Delaware Indian interpreter guide. He had served with such important figures as the Indian agent Robert Neighbors here in Texas, and also Captain Randolph Marcy. Now, Longstreet, as I'm sure most people are aware, went on to become famous as a Confederate general in the Civil War, or otherwise, as they called it afterwards, the Late Unpleasantness. The war itself drew relatively little attention from artists in Texas. But it did. There were two that we're going to look at. If we'll do. Oh. Thank you. Okay. This was done in 1888 by German C.H. Klaus. This is in Comfort, Texas, one of the German settlements. And this is an incident when there were 28 Germans, 61 Germans had left Comfort. They were trying to make it to Matamoros to sail to New Orleans to join the Union Army because they were Union sympathizers as meeting the Germans in the Hill Country. And before they could get there, a week after they left Comfort, 94 Confederates attacked their camp on the Nueces in present-day Kenny County. Now, the Unionists were outgunned and outnumbered, but they held out for several hours, but they were all killed, captured, or they just got away. Now, Klaus reputedly based this painting on interviews with residents of the area. We're situated behind the Germans' position. There was kind of against the river, looking out the way they would have looked at it. They're backed up to the edge of the river, and their Comfort. Some of you I know this. I think it is the only monument to Union soldiers in one of the Confederate states. So it was a very bitter, very unhappy episode. And actually, it's sometimes called the Massacre of the Nueces. Now, the other painting about the war is this one. Okay. A San Antonio artist and a San Antonio family who needs no introduction. But Sam Maverick had joined Terry's Texas Rangers, and Carl G. von Ivansky portrayed him in 1862. Now, Ivansky probably did not see this scene. He was a staunch Unionist. The Mavericks obviously were not, but they kind of agreed to disagree because Ivansky was such a good artist, and obviously they paid him to do this. And Ivansky was born and reared in Silesia, which had been part of Germany, sometimes part of Poland. Other times, he came to his family to Texas as a young boy. He came here to San Antonio in 1857 or 58. He liked formal artistic training, but started retouching portraits in oil and other media. Now, this is Ivansky here in the studio, and I couldn't resist including this is Ivansky as a Venetian gondolier for a costume party at the Casino Club here in San Antonio. Now, Ivansky also did the. Can we advance? Okay. This is the first illustration of the war. It appeared in Harper's Weekly in June of 1861. It's of a Confederate camp at Los Moras near San Antonio. So that Ivansky does have that distinction as well. Now, in Texas, the war and Reconstruction drastically altered the equation of audience demand and artist motivation. Of all the defeated southern states, only Texas has successfully fought a war against a foreign power, the Texas Revolution. That gave Texas a separate usable past that could be employed after the war. And one person who did this, there we go, was James T. DeShields. DeShields was a dry goods dealer. He lived all over Texas. This photograph was taken in his home. I think it's his home probably in Dallas near the SMU campus, his wife and his daughter. I had the privilege of meeting his daughter who lived here in San Antonio, but that's another story. Anyhow, DeShields wrote a lot of popular Texas history books. He employed Robert Onderdonk, Henry McCardle, and other artists to fulfill commissions for paintings. Onderdonk, we'll talk more about him in a minute. Obviously needs no introduction here. He's already been mentioned this morning by Maurice. He come here in the 1870s from Maryland to paint portraits of wealthy cattlemen, except when he got here, there was a horrible drought, and the cattlemen didn't have money to have their portraits painted. So he sort of got stuck, but wound up obviously having a great career. McCardle had served as a topographical artist for Robert E. Lee, and in 1867 took a position in the art faculty of Baylor Female College in Independence. Now, McCardle started painting portraits of the Texas Civil War veterans, a lot of them from Hood's Brigade, and got fascinated with Texas history and did this painting, The Settlement of Austin's Colony. Major Moses Austin Bryan, who was Stephen F. Austin's nephew, suggested he do this. McCardle described it as the first of a series of works, in quote, which I hope to illustrate to posterity the grand achievements of the heroes and statesmen of the Texas Revolution. Okay, in this painting, we're pretty sure that McCardle's thinking about Austin getting ready for his 1824 campaign against the Caracua Indians. He's reaching for a musket up here. He has the role of, he calls Austin impresario, general, judge, and father of the colony, issuing land titles and surrounded by his aides, arrested in his work by the hasty entrance of a scout. Austin's holding a book here in his hand, and of course, people, I guess you realize this is in the state capitol, in the Speaker's House chamber. And the book is titled Laws of Mexico in English, which I thought was very considerate of the Mexican authorities, even though Austin did teach him spell Spanish and was completely bilingual. Okay, now more than a quarter century later, yeah, can you advance, please? Yeah, he did this painting with another guy with his arm up that, Ben Milam, calling for volunteers. He had talked to Ben Milam's son, got a lot of research material from him, photographs and this sort of thing. He also drew other elements of this painting from the account of Texas Revolutionary veteran Creed Taylor. He dictated his memoirs to James DeShields. His name's going to come up a lot here in the next few minutes. And DeShields later edited these recollections and published them as a book called Tall Men with Long Rifles in 1935. And he had really described Milam in this posture. He actually drew a line in the dirt, okay, allegedly. And Milam, not Travis, Milam in this. And there's the come and take it flag is in the background. Okay, but portraiture is not the focus of McCardle's most extensive efforts to execute his series of paintings. The same year that he did this one, he did his first version of Dawn at the Alamo. Okay, can you advance that, please? This is not working. Okay. Now, I don't have the 1875 version has been destroyed in a fire. It is a reproduction of it was made. A photograph. It's online. If you haven't looked at the McCardle Scrapbooks website on the State Library and Archives website, it is fantastic. It had, when I was in grad school, I went down there and just spent hours going through these scrapbooks. Of course, this is before the internet. It was like my own little treasure trove. People weren't using these things, and they were wonderful. Now the whole world can see them. So, but the 1881 Capitol fire destroyed the original version, but McCardle went 30 years, did more research, and did this one that we all know that's in the Capitol now. He corresponded with several individuals he regarded as experts on the battle, including Reuben Potter, the military historian of the Texas Revolution, and Santa Anna. And Santa Anna wrote him back. And he said that I did what I did at the Alamo because of the, quote, obstinacy of the, quote, insulting Travis and his men. And Santa Anna feared that Sam Houston was going to show up with a respectable, as he termed it, amount of troops. And McCardle would write back to Santa Anna in the margins. It was really great fun to read this stuff. Now, McCardle took pains to include, can you next slide, please? Yeah. Oh, there's the original. Okay, right there. Okay. Yeah, next one. Yeah, let's go one more. Okay. He included Robert Evans. Next time you have to look closely. He's got kind of a gray-green guy doing this with a knife. That's Bowie. And he got up off the, he knew that Bowie was in the chapel and all that, but Potter said, this is a license as poetical as it is allowable. So Potter gave it, he was like a technical advisor for a movie. And here he has, of course, Davy Crockett in right here, swinging old Betsy, dealing death to all within his reach. And so I'm sure Walt Disney consulted this before having Fess Parker do what he did. Okay, now, McCardle, I think, probably was motivated to get this painting done after 30 years of research. Uh-oh. Can we go back? Yeah, by this fellow here in that painting. Okay. Okay. Onderdonk undoubtedly knew about McCardle's work, and DeShields, of all people, in 1901, commissioned Onderdonk to do an Alamo painting. So Onderdonk does a study sketch, we'll see momentarily, and he wrote DeShields, this is to convey a sense of, quote, battle, murder, and sudden death. I want to make the picture intentionally interesting and realistic. Everything must be painted from nature. Onderdock got his sons dressed up in military garb from the 1830s and had them carry weapons and play soldier, and he photographed them and then would work from the photographs. So there we go. So there's the study sketch here on the right, Death of Crockett, and the finished painting there on the left. Now, and the reviews were, great. He got all kinds of positive reviews. And there was another incident involving this painting here in San Antonio that was controversial, but that I can't get into that here. That's a whole other story. Okay, now perhaps less known than these two paintings is another Alamo painting, our last Alamo painting. Death of Dickinson. Now, Gentiles did incredible research for this. He did, there we go, these detailed sketches. Martha Utterback, when I was at the DRT library at the Alamo in the 80s, says, well, we've got his study sketches. Do you want to see them? I went, are you kidding me? So she goes back there and pulls this box. There's all these sketches of all these bridle bits and knives. And I was like, this is great. And this one here, okay. So this shows us mathematical training. It's all these lines of perspective and you can see how the point of Santa Anna's sword lines up with the corner of the. Did we go? Oh, whoa! Uh-oh. I just hit the blackout button accidentally, I think. Did I hit it again? There we go. Okay. Okay, so what this was, there was this story that Almaron Dickinson, the Alamo artillery commander, had tried to surrender, and Santa Anna had said no and killed him and his daughter. But this is, Gentiles had, he said, well, if I get a lot of the same fact is recounted in the same way by a number of witnesses, it must be considered as true. But even though he's working here, just less than 10 or 20 years after the Alamo, he knew that people were embellishing things and maybe even making things up. Now, we know the other major battle of the Revolution was this one. Okay. In the lobby of the state capitol. By William Huddle. Huddle was from Virginia. He had served in the Confederate cavalry under Joe Wheeler and Nathan Bedford Forrest. He moved with his family to Paris, Texas after the war and worked as a gunsmith. Then went back to Virginia and studied painting under his cousin, went to New York and studied the National Academy of Design. Came back to Texas and took up residence in Austin and shared a studio with Herman Lundquist, Friedrich Richard Petrie's brother-in-law, and began painting Texas political and military figures. Huddle had he had a very charming personality, apparently a real in with people at the Capitol. In 1884, he went to Munich to study art, probably with Lundquist's encouragement. Within a year after that, he was homesick for Austin, yearned for his fiancée, came back to Texas in 1885, and he realized, hey, we've got a semi-centennial coming up here, kind of an important event. And he started trying to paint portraits of Texas, former Texas governors, but he realized he had this great opportunity. So he goes to San Jacinto several times, sketches it and things like that, but there's pretty good indication that the actual landscape portion was done by Lundquist, the big treaty oak and that sort of thing. So there's 34 portraits. This is every Texas county, I think. All these guys had counties named after them. This is the Texas county portrait, you could say. But he's got Deaf Smith here, Houston, Santa Ana, and kneeling right here, Moses Austin Bryan, these guys here with a rope and a noose, what they want to do. Now, this is not the original version of the painting. This is the original version of the painting. And Moses Austin Bryan isn't there. What happened, he painted it, took it to the legislature, said, this is great, but you kind of left out somebody important, the interpreter. Oh, him. Okay, I'll go back to the studio. They said, paint him in and we'll buy it. He did, and they did. So there you go with and without Moses Austin Bryan. Okay, and you can talk to JP about that tomorrow when he's here. Okay, now the other iconic painting about San Jacinto in the Capitol, of course, is this one, McCardle's Battle of San Jacinto. McCardle originally wanted to pattern this painting after, well, hold it. I'm not sure. Yeah, this one, Battle of Chapultepec. He'd seen this in Washington, D.C. But it really came to owe more to an earlier battle painting that did, Lee at the Wilderness. Now, this painting originally had been, in the original version of this painting had been in the Capitol as the original Dawn at the Alamo. It also was destroyed in 1881. He got inspired to this by meeting with veterans of Hood's Texas Brigade. At the Battle of the Wilderness, Lee was going to lead them into the battle, and they grabbed his traveler's bridle and said, "Lee to the rear, Lee to the rear, we're not going into the battle with you leading us." They didn't want to risk Lee getting killed. So several of these men were used as model in this painting, and you can see he's using smoke, fire, light, kind of atmospheric effects in both of them. Now, several years after, so there's the finished work. Now, he did this one in 1901. So he repainted Lee at the Wilderness and the Battle of San Jacinto paintings for patrons. He repainted Lee at the Wilderness for a physician who had lent McCardle money for painting supplies, and he did this one for James DeShields. DeShields asked him to repaint it, and we get the smaller version with the central portion of the big painting here with there's Sam Houston, for example, right there. Now, this painting was discovered in an attic about 10 years ago in West Virginia. Atlee Phillips is back here, and she was instrumental in selling that painting, so it was really quite an amazing story how it wound up in an attic in West Virginia from Texas, which I don't have time to tell here, unfortunately. There was a 15-page description that McCardle did in the 1890s of the Battle of San Jacinto, the 1895 painting. And he says the shadows of sunset add to the dramatic effect of the death grapple and convey intense and graphic power softened by poetic fervor. So McCardle was very much conscious of this romantic, heroic. He was almost some Washington Crossing and Delaware type of painting. He had done lots of research at San Jacinto. Unlike, here's a comparison of the smaller version, the big version. This fella, a Frenchman who had never come to Texas, as far as we know, he portrays. I feel like the George Carlin routine on Lawrence Welk. Somebody turn off the bubble machine. Anyway, but Houston is kind of this a dapper French cavalry officer. It's really a bizarre painting in some ways. We know he was W.W. Corcoran, who was a wealthy individual in Washington, D.C. He was a Southern sympathizer. So was Guillaume. Whether Corcoran commissioned this work or Guillaume took it on his own, we don't know. But it was on his easel when he died. Now, about the same time, can we advance? Next slide. Oh, whoa. Yeah. Okay. Stephen Seymour Thomas, who I mentioned earlier, did this for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Thomas was a native Texan. His family had known Houston. He had studied in Paris as well as in New York, and had been really a prodigy from an early age. At age 12, the governor of Texas, he sketched him, and the guy he showed to Huddle, and Huddle said, "This guy's really got something. He's really good." Okay, aside from the events of the Texas Revolution, the one incident that really sparked interest in Texas and historical consciousness was, can we go to the next slide? Yeah, we go. Mayor Expedition. Okay. And when this sort of renegade expedition disobeys Sam Houston's instructions, goes across the border in Mexico, gets captured, and they are decimated. In other words, every 10th man is killed by drawing the black beam, which we get the famous expression here in Texas. It's funny if you say to somebody who doesn't know the story, "You drew the black beam," you get this really weird look. So Gentils had patterned this this painting after an engraving. This is 1885. Yeah, okay, so here's the comparison. This was published 40 years earlier, Charles McLaughlin, in a book by Thomas Green about the Amir expedition. And he had followed closely his written account. Now, there are some differences. Like Gentile shows a soldier turning away, and their backs are to the firing squad. These guys are facing the firing squad. But overall, we know he must have gotten his ideas from this. Now, there was one more painting of the Amir expedition by this guy some of y'all may have heard of. Remington, it's funny that he did this. Remington hated Texas. He came here once. He hated the mosquitoes, the food, and wrote to his wife, "I fully agree with Phil Sheridan. If I owned Texas and hell, I'd live in hell and rent out Texas." But he came, nevertheless, in the 1890s, he came back, spent a few days here in San Antonio. He didn't paint the Alamo, which seemed a natural for Remington's interest, but he started talking to Rip Ford and Bigfoot Wallace and other former Texas Rangers who, they could tell a good story. So he did this. This is the actual, I should have shown the chronologically the instant. This is when they were drawing their beans. And this was an illustration in a Harper's New Monthly Magazine article that Remington did in 1896, How the Law Got into the Chaparral. Now, our last painting, this one, yeah, the Galveston flood, the Galveston hurricane. Stockfleth was a German immigrant to Texas. He had come to Galveston, painted beautiful scenes of the Galveston Harbor, gorgeous scenes of the Galveston Harbor, but was there for the hurricane. He lost 12 of his family members. He and a brother and sister were the only survivors. And as we know, it was the greatest natural disaster in U.S. history, killed 6,000 people. And he, kind of his therapy, Stockfleth did this series of a lot of paintings about what happened. It's kind of strange, but this is the Tremont, rescuing people from the Tremont Hotel in Galveston by the city's men in the city's fire department. So I chose to end this here because the Galveston hurricane really destroyed the city that was, Galveston and San Antonio were the most important Texas cities. Galveston was the seaport, cotton, agriculture flowed out through Galveston. And it's sort of symbolic. Agriculture always didn't end, but Galveston was destroyed, and the next year Spindletop came in. So that the pivot of Texas history then turns from agriculture to oil, and urbanism was mentioned, and the growth of the big cities like Houston, Dallas, and of course this one here. Okay, that's all I've got, and we're supposed to have Q&A, I think, if we have time. Yeah.
Yes. So, anyone want to start off? Thank you, Sam, for that wonderful overview of such a rich variety of Texas paintings. While people are formulating, I was really wanting to ask you if there were particular things about your time studying with Dr. Getzman that informed your work.
Everything? No, real quick, I had two ideas for a dissertation that if I had tried either one, I would still be working on it. Bill Getzman taught me out of it. And he said, why don't you do paintings of Texas? I shouldn't confess all these things, but I'm retired, so I'll tell him now. He said, why don't you do paintings of Texas history, because he was working on his series, The West of the Imagination, became an award-winning book, PBS series. He said, Texas history? I said, yeah, but I don't know art history. He says, oh, you can teach yourself that. So anyway, I thought, no, you can teach yourself that because you're a genius. And Yale published your dissertation without any changes. He would do this to his graduate students all the time. So whether or not I taught myself art history, then I started trying to learn it. So anyhow, that's how. So as art is historical documents. So I would say that's what it was. Is how, and because people who knew me earlier in my life, they would go, "You're doing what? You're doing art? You? Your family didn't go to art museums, okay?" So anyway, but yeah, so that's how it happened. It was, and I learned along with some quips and other things I've quoted here today.
Wow, and I see a hand from Light Cummins in the back of the room.
Wow. I think more the latter. I think the Germans, I think Ivansky, Petri, Lundquist, they were more, well, of course, Petri and Lundquist were related. They were, literally.
In-laws.
In-laws. And they had similar backgrounds. But I think it was more they were just either painting what they knew or responding to patrons like DeShong, and there weren't that many patrons. And they were, and I don't know if, now Jean Thiels, of course, he was here for so long, but that he definitely became part of the San Antonio art community. But if you mean the selection of their subjects, I don't think there was a coordination from what I can tell. I think they were just painting what they knew, what they thought would be appealing.
And atomized is such an interesting word in that context. I'm just thinking about the last quarter of the 19th century, and Sam, do you have a sense of there being a rivalry between Huddle and McArdle and Onderdonk as not so much being a school, but actually trying to?
I don't have a sense of it. I've got evidence. And anybody else can. You go to McArdle's scrapbooks, and he would. There were. I don't have it here. I think it was in my painting section book. He makes a note. I think I put it in a footnote, and I was told by certain people, like my wife and former professor, no, put this in footnotes, or your footnotes are too long. Put it in the body of the text, and they were right anyway. But he talks about Huddle's Surrender of Santa Ana. He said something and he was writing to someone, an inaccurate depiction, as you know, or something like, So McArdle, McArdle was the stereotypical, visionary. He was eccentric. I mean, and all this kind of thing, and wanted to do this grand sweep of everything. And Huddle my mom's from Paris, Texas, so I'm not down on Huddle. I'm just saying Huddle had a defined role, and he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to paint governors and important people and be the state's official painter, and he really succeeded in a lot of ways, because McArdle kept loaning paintings to the Capitol that kept getting burned up, and well, just once, but but then and they never paid him. They never bought the paintings till after he passed away 3 years earlier, and even then his family had to fight for it. So it was the whole DeShong, Onderdonk, McArdle triangle or whatever is very interesting. I don't know about that. And I asked DeShong's daughter, and she was little. She didn't really know at the time. She didn't know.
I'm glad that you included the Richard Petrie of Fort Martin Scott, and it's kind of interesting to me. That date that we have assigned to that painting of 1853 is that was basically when Fort Martin Scott shut down, because the border was moving farther out, and so you were moving to Fort Mason, and you get Fort Concho and the like. So there's almost sort of a marking the end of an era sort of thing going on, and yet Petrie being so focused as a portraitist, it almost looks to me that it's not so much a history painting as one big group portrait. And I wonder if he didn't finish it because he was hoping that by doing all these portraits in a row, it would become a history painting, and yet he knew that it was something different. I don't know.
I think
everybody go look at the painting in the gallery, because it's really interesting.
I think the painting to compare it to in that respect is Huddle's Surrender of Santa Ana, because that's a collection of portraits under a tree.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it is. And, Houston was there on the Mexican blanket gesturing to Santa Ana. But it's the same thing. They're both a collection of portraits. And, of course, Houston's depicting an event. And Petrie's not, Huddle's depicting an event. Petrie's really not depicting an event. He's depicting a time or a place. But, they're both kind of the same
and
thing.
I'm glad that you mentioned the connection between Huddle and Lundquist, and that Lundquist may have been involved in the landscape part of the surrender of Santa Ana.
I don't know if you heard. I've heard Nanny Huddle's widow. She didn't take kindly people suggesting that Lundquist had painted. I don't know if this was in print or somebody told me they talked to her once and it came up, and she's, oh no, William painted the whole thing. Because they shared a studio. By Huddle. Right. Yeah. He sketched. Oh, no, he sketched it. No, I said he sketched
Right.
the treaty oak.
Well, and it's very complicated too, because actually in the exhibit you can see Huddle's none of the history paintings, but the painting that he did of Marble Falls, which is very much showing the way that he and Lundqvist were influencing one another, and so I think that the story probably has some kernel of truth in it, but it's more complicated because they were probably doing sketching trips all the time together.
Yeah, I should be dogmatic and say Huddle did none of the landscape, not that, but that I think he definitely, because they sketched together, and they shared a studio, and I think he definitely, Lundqvist I think was probably trained more as a landscapist than Huddle.
Absolutely.
And you look at his German background, we just look at his body of work, and I think he at least had a pretty strong influence in the landscape of that painting. But
Well, I like the fact that we're ending this session on Herman Lundqvist, one of my faves, and write about him in the catalog.
Yeah.
And Amy is telling us we are out of time, and Mary Margaret's coming in too, so that means
Oh,
we're
my
really
goodness.
out of time. But thank you guys for coming in. Thank you, Sam, for a fascinating lecture.